I stood outside the massive mahogany door of Unit 407, a luxury penthouse overlooking the city. When my brother-in-law Julian opened it, a smug smile plastered across his face and a glass of expensive wine in his hand. He expected a defeated man. He had spent 2 years destroying my marriage, tearing my life apart so his best friend could take my place. But as I pulled out my tablet, his smile vanished. He had no idea I was about to teach him a lesson he would never forget. Thank you for being here. Please comment why to let me know you're ready, and listen as I tell you the whole story. The hallway of the downtown high-rise was dead silent. The thick carpets absorbed the sound of my footsteps as I walked toward Unit 407. I wore a tailored gray suit, my tie perfectly straight, holding a leather folder and a tablet in my left hand. My heart beat at a steady, calm pace. I was not here for revenge in the traditional sense. I was here for business. I stopped in front of the heavy mahogany door. The brass numbers gleamed under the soft overhead lighting. I raised my hand and knocked firmly 3 times. I waited. From inside, I could hear the faint sound of upbeat music playing. Then, footsteps approached the door. The deadbolt clicked, and the door swung inward. Julian stood there. He was wearing an expensive silk robe over a pair of designer jeans, a glass of red wine casually pinched between his fingers. It was 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. He looked me up and down, his eyes widening for a fraction of a second before his default expression of smug superiority settled back onto his face. He leaned against the doorframe, taking a slow sip of his wine. He let out a short, breathy laugh, clearly amused to see the man whose life he had worked so hard to dismantle standing on his doorstep. "What are you doing here, Mason?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You got lost? Olivia isn't here, and even if she was, she has nothing to say to you." I looked at him, completely unfazed by his attempt to bait me. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. I simply looked him in the eyes with the cold detachment of a man who held all the cards. "I am not here to see Olivia," I said. My voice was flat and steady. "I am here for the property inspection." Julian frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. He took the wine glass away from his lips. "Property inspection? What the hell are you talking about? You can't just barge in here. I have rights as a tenant. You have no authority here." "Actually, I do," I replied, stepping forward so that he had to instinctively step back. "As the owner of this building, I have the absolute right to inspect this unit with proper notice. A notice which was sent to your email and your physical mailbox exactly 10 days ago." I watched the blood drain from his face. His jaw went slack, and the wine sloshed precariously in his glass. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp panic. He tried to speak, but only a dry rasp came out. He had spent 2 years manipulating my wife, turning her against me, and treating me like garbage. He thought he had won. He thought he had banished me from their lives forever. He had no idea that while he was busy playing his petty family games, I was quietly building an empire, and he was currently standing right in the middle of it. But to understand how we got to this doorway, you need to know how the nightmare started. Started subtly exactly 2 years ago. The kind of subtle that makes you question your own sanity. I had just gotten a major promotion at work, stepping up to a regional director role. My salary had increased significantly, and I thought my wife Olivia and I were entering the best phase of our lives. We were talking about the future, about building a real foundation. But Julian, her older brother, had other plans. He was the golden child of her family, a man who believed the world owed him everything despite doing nothing to earn it. Julian hated me. He hated that I was independent. He hated that I didn't need his family's approval. Most of all, he hated that Olivia listened to me. He began his campaign of sabotage with small, deniable things. We would have family dinners at her mother's house. Julian was always the one organizing them. He would text Olivia the time, say 6 o'clock. But he would text me directly and say 7 o'clock. I would arrive after a long day of work, walking into the dining room an hour late. Everyone would already be eating. Julian would look at me with wide, innocent eyes and that fake, practiced smile. "Sorry, Mason," he would say loudly for the whole table to hear. "Must have slipped my mind to update you on the time change. We just couldn't wait any longer." The roast was getting cold. I would look at Olivia, expecting her to say something, to defend me, but she would just look down at her plate. I tried talking to her about it later that night in our kitchen. I told her it wasn't an accident. He had done it 3 times in a row. But she just shook her head, defending him like she always did. "You are overreacting, Mason," she said, crossing her arms. "He is just protective. We are a really close family. He has a lot on his plate right now. You just need to be more understanding." Then came the photos. We went on a family vacation to the lake. I paid for the cabin rental. I bought the groceries. I drove us all there. But when Julian posted the photo album online, there were 50 pictures, and I was entirely cropped out of every single one of them. You could see my shoulder in one, my hand holding a coffee cup in another. But my face was nowhere to be found. When I pointed it out, Julian just laughed it off, saying the framing was better that way. It was a calculated effort to erase me from the narrative of their lives. He was sending a message. "You do not belong here, and you never will." I bit my tongue because I loved Olivia. I thought if I just showed her consistency and patience, she would eventually see through his manipulative games. I thought the foundation of our marriage was stronger than the toxic bonds of her family. I was a man who solved problems logically, but I was dealing with people who operated entirely on emotional manipulation. I did not realize that Julian was just laying the groundwork. He was isolating me, making me look like the difficult, demanding husband, preparing the stage for his masterstroke. Things escalated when Carter moved back to town. Carter was Julian's best friend from high school. He had just gone through a messy divorce and lost custody of his 2 kids. He came back to our city looking like a beaten dog, carrying his belongings in a few cardboard boxes. Julian immediately took him under his wing, or rather, he weaponized him. Suddenly, Carter was at every single family event. If we went out for Sunday brunch, Carter was there. If we had a backyard barbecue, Carter was sitting in my patio chair. Julian made it his personal mission to integrate Carter into my household. He would intentionally seat Carter right next to Olivia at dinner tables, physically placing him between us. "Carter is having such a hard time right now," Julian would say, patting his friend on the back. "He needs family around him." But it was not just about giving Carter a plate of food. Julian started orchestrating situations where Carter was acting like the man of my house. I worked long hours, often leaving the house by 6 in the morning and not returning until 7 at night. One Tuesday, I came home exhausted to find Carter under my kitchen sink with a wrench. Olivia was standing next to him, laughing at something he said, handing him a towel. I froze in the doorway, my briefcase suddenly heavy in my hand. "What is going on here?" I asked, my voice tight. Olivia turned, looking entirely unbothered. "Oh, the garbage disposal was jammed. Julian sent Carter over to look at it since you were so busy at the office. Carter is so good with these things." My jaw tightened. A vein throbbed near my temple. I was the husband. It was my house. I could have fixed the sink in 10 minutes, or I could have hired a professional. I did not need another man playing the role of provider in my own kitchen. I confronted Julian about it the next day over the phone. I told him to stop sending his friends to my house when I was not there. Julian just chuckled. "Wow, Mason. I didn't realize you were so insecure. The guy is just trying to help out. He is practically family. Maybe if you spent less time chasing your next salary bump and more time at home, Olivia wouldn't need to rely on us so much." He flipped the script perfectly, making me the villain. He made me sound jealous and unhinged. When I brought it up to Olivia, she echoed Julian's exact words. She accused me of being paranoid and controlling. "Carter was just a friend," she said. "He was going through a tough time. Why couldn't I just be supportive?" I watched as Carter began bringing Olivia her favorite coffee in the mornings. I watched as they laughed at inside jokes Julian had clearly fed them. Julian was directing a play, and he had cast Carter as the lead, while pushing me off the stage completely. And the worst part was, Olivia was happily reading the script he handed her. The psychological warfare became unbearable during the holidays. We drove 4 hours to visit her mother, a woman who had never hidden her disdain for me. Her mother was exactly like Julian, or rather, Julian was a perfect reflection of her. She thrived on control and drama. We arrived at her large suburban house the day before Thanksgiving. I carried our heavy suitcases up the porch steps, trying to maintain a polite smile. When we walked inside, Carter was already there. He was sitting on the living room sofa, drinking a beer and watching football with Julian. I stopped in the hallway, looking at Olivia. She refused to meet my eyes. Her mother came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "Oh, good, you made it," she said, barely glancing at me. "Olivia, honey, you go take the guest room upstairs. Carter is going to take the other spare room since he needs a good night's sleep with all the stress he is under." I set the bags down. The thud echoed in the hallway. "And where exactly are we sleeping?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. Her mother waved a dismissive hand. "Well, space is a bit tight this year. Olivia can take the bed, and Mason, you can take the pull-out couch down here in the den. It just makes sense space-wise. You do not mind, right?" I looked at my wife. We were married. We were supposed to share a room. They were actively separating us, prioritizing a friend of the family over a husband. Olivia looked at her shoes, then muttered, "It is just for a few nights, Mason. Don't make a scene, please." I did not make a scene. I am not the kind of man who screams or throws things. I nodded slowly, picked up my bag, and walked to the den. I spent 3 nights sleeping on a mattress with a metal bar digging into my spine. During the day, I was completely invisible. Julian would suggest they all go look at old family photo albums. They would sit in a tight circle on the floor, Carter included, laughing and reminiscing. If I tried to join, the conversation would dry up. Julian would look at me and say, "You really had to be there, Mason. It is kind of a family thing." They were bleeding me out by 1,000 tiny cuts. They were showing Olivia what her life could look like without the burden of her difficult husband, and with the easy, compliant presence of Carter. I realized then that they did not just want me gone. They wanted to humiliate me on the way out. They wanted to break my spirit so completely that I would walk away believing I was the problem. I sat on that terrible pull-out couch in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, feeling a cold, hard resolve settling into my chest. I was done trying to fix something that was designed to break. The final strike happened right before Christmas. Every year, we spent the week leading up to the holiday with my family. It was a tradition we had agreed on before we even got married. But a week before we were supposed to leave, I noticed Olivia acting strange. She was avoiding eye contact, spending a lot of time texting in the bathroom, and packing bags she quickly hid in the closet. One evening, I came home early and found her laptop open on the kitchen island. The screen was bright, showing an itinerary for a massive family ski trip to a luxury cabin in Aspen. The dates matched our planned trip to my parents' house perfectly. I scrolled down the guest list. Her mother, Julian, Carter, and Olivia. My name was nowhere on the document. I heard footsteps behind me. Olivia froze in the kitchen entrance when she saw me looking at the screen. We stood there in silence for a long moment. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly seemed incredibly loud. "You are going to Aspen," I said. It was not a question. She swallowed hard, crossing her arms defensively. "Julian planned it as a surprise. He got a great deal on the cabin. And you were just going to leave?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "When were you going to tell me?" "On your way to the airport. And why is Carter on this list instead of your husband?" She immediately went on the offensive, parroting Julian's talking points. "Don't start with the Carter thing again, Mason. He is alone for the holidays. Julian just wanted to do something nice. And there wasn't any room left in the cabin anyway. I thought you would want to go see your parents alone this year. You are always so stressed around my family." I looked at the woman I had married. I looked at the stranger standing in my kitchen, lying to my face to protect her brother's manipulation. I realized there was no marriage left to save. There were just 3 people in this relationship. Me, Olivia, and Julian. And I was the odd man out. Go to Aspen, I said quietly. She blinked, surprised by how easily I surrendered. Really? You are not mad? I am not mad, I said, walking past her toward the hallway. Have a great trip, Olivia. She went on the trip. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from social media. Julian had posted a picture. They were all sitting by a massive stone fireplace in the cabin. Carter was sitting right next to Olivia. They were both wearing matching ugly Christmas sweaters. The caption read, "Family is everything." I stared at the photo for a long time. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt entirely, perfectly clear. I picked up my phone, dialed my lawyer, and scheduled a meeting for the day after Christmas. The storm was finally breaking. When Olivia came back from Aspen, the house was empty. Not of furniture, but of me. I had packed my essential belongings into 3 suitcases and moved into a short-term rental across town. The divorce papers were sitting on the kitchen island, right where her laptop had been when I discovered the ski trip. She called me, crying hysterically, demanding to know what was happening. I met her at a coffee shop the next day. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and puffy. She tried to grab my hand across the table, but I pulled it back. "You are really doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Over a ski trip." "It is not about a ski trip, Olivia," I said smoothly, keeping my emotions completely locked down. "It is about the fact that you chose your brother over your husband every single day of our marriage. If you cannot see how he is destroying us, then we should not be together." She immediately fell back into her training. "Julian was right. You are just trying to control me. You are paranoid." I nodded. "Then signing those papers should be very easy for you." The divorce was quick and surprisingly clean. There was no bitter fight over assets because I made it simple. I did not want to drag it out. We had bought our house together, with some help from her parents for the down payment. I walked away from it. I let her have the house. I kept my retirement accounts and my investment portfolio. She did not know the extent of my investments because she had never asked, and Julian had always convinced her I was just a corporate drone chasing a salary. They thought I was walking away with nothing but a paycheck. We sat in the lawyer's office on a rainy Tuesday morning to sign the final documents. The room smelled of old paper and leather. The lawyer slid the pen across the heavy wooden desk. We both signed. When she handed the pen back, a tear rolled down her cheek. "I still love you," she whispered. I looked at her, feeling a profound sense of pity. "I love you too," I said. "But love is not enough when your family is actively against us." I walked out of the building and into the rain. I felt lighter. I had excised a tumor from my life. I had lost the woman I loved, but I had kept my dignity. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. I was completely focused on rebuilding my life, far away from their toxic drama. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I would never have to deal with Julian or his mother again. But I was wrong. The universe has a strange way of balancing the scales. They did not even wait for the ink to dry on the divorce decree. Less than a month after the papers were finalized, Julian threw what he called a fresh start party for Olivia. I did not need to be invited to know about it. Julian made sure it was broadcast to the entire world. He posted dozens of videos and pictures online. He rented out the back patio of an upscale restaurant downtown. The photos showed Olivia smiling, holding a glass of champagne, and right beside her, with his arm firmly wrapped around her waist, was Carter. Julian had finally succeeded. He had successfully swapped out the husband he hated for the compliant best friend he could control. One video specifically caught my attention. It was a toast. Julian stood up, tapping a fork against his glass. The camera focused on his smug face. "To my beautiful sister," Julian announced, his voice echoing over the patio. She finally dropped the dead weight and found someone who truly understands the meaning of family. "To Olivia and Carter." The crowd cheered. Olivia leaned into Carter and kissed him. I sat in my home office watching the video on my monitor. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. A lesser man might have thrown a glass at the wall. A lesser man might have driven down to that restaurant and caused a scene. But I just closed the laptop. I let the sting of betrayal wash over me, acknowledging it, and then I buried it deep inside. Let them have their victory lap. Let them think they had ruined me. They thought I was sitting alone in a cheap apartment, grieving the loss of my glorious marriage. They had no idea that while they were busy destroying my personal life, I had been ruthlessly building my financial one. Over the past 5 years, long before the marriage started falling apart, I had been funneling a large portion of my salary and bonuses into real estate investments through an LLC. It was a protective measure, a habit I developed early in life. I never mingled those assets with our joint accounts. I was quietly accumulating wealth, securing my future. I watched their party online and realized something fundamental about Julian. He was driven entirely by appearance. He needed to look rich, powerful, and in control. He needed an audience. And people who live for the audience eventually make mistakes. They overextend themselves. They rent lives they cannot afford. I did not know it at that moment, but Julian's obsession with looking like a king was about to deliver him right into my hands. Following the success of his master plan, Julian's ego inflated to dangerous levels. With me out of the picture, he positioned himself as the undisputed patriarch of his family. To cement this new status, he decided he needed to upgrade his lifestyle. His modest apartment in the suburbs was no longer suitable for a man of his perceived importance. He moved into the city. He leased a massive, 1,200-square-foot luxury apartment in a high-end downtown building. It had a doorman, a rooftop pool, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Naturally, he documented every single step of this move on social media. So blessed to have this amazing space, he captioned a photo of himself standing on a marble balcony, holding a coffee cup and looking out at the city. Living my best life. Sometimes good things come from bad situations. That was a direct shot at me. But he didn't stop there. 2 weeks later, he posted a photo leaning against the hood of a brand new, sleek black Porsche 911. The caption read, "Hard work pays off." I knew Julian's financial situation. I knew what he did for a living, and I knew what his salary was. There was absolutely no way he could afford a luxury downtown penthouse and a Porsche without drowning himself in massive debt. He was likely leveraging every credit card he had and bleeding his mother's savings dry to maintain this illusion of grandeur. He was building a house of cards, desperate to prove to the world and probably to me that he was the superior man. He threw extravagant dinner parties in that apartment. He invited Carter and Olivia over constantly, posting pictures of them drinking expensive wine in his high-end kitchen. He called it their new family headquarters. He was playing the benevolent king, showering his subjects with his supposed wealth. I watched this circus from afar with a growing sense of amusement. I had always known Julian was a fraud, a man hollowed out by his own narcissism. But seeing him try to buy his way into an elite status was almost sad. I focused on my work. My regional director role demanded 80 hours a week, and I poured all my frustration into my career. My bonuses grew. My investment portfolio expanded. I was building real, tangible wealth while Julian was renting a fantasy. I had completely written Julian and Olivia out of my mind. I was ready to close that chapter forever. I never intended to interact with them again. But sometimes, fate drops an absolute miracle right into your lap. It was a rainy Thursday morning when the turning point arrived. I was sitting in the sleek, glass-walled office of my accountant, Christopher. Christopher was a sharp, no-nonsense guy who handled the complex tax structures of my various investments. We were doing our quarterly review of my real estate portfolio. Over the years, I had acquired several properties through an LLC named Apex Holdings. It was a simple legal structure designed to protect my privacy and limit my liability. I had buildings in 3 different zip codes, all managed by a third-party property management firm. I never dealt with the tenants directly. I just reviewed the numbers. Christopher pushed a thick manila folder across the mahogany desk. "The downtown property is performing exceptionally well, Mason," he said, tapping a silver pen against the financial statement. Occupancy is at 98%, and the recent rent increases haven't caused any turnover. We did have one premium unit open up a few months ago, Unit 407. But the management company filled it almost immediately with a high-income applicant. I picked up the report, scanning the columns of numbers. Unit 407 was the penthouse suite, the crown jewel of that specific building. Commanded the highest rent in the district. I flipped to the tenant registry to review the new lease details. My eyes scanned down the list of names, moving past the doctors and corporate lawyers who typically rented in that building. My finger stopped halfway down the page. I stared at the name. I read it once. Then I read it again. The letters seemed to jump off the crisp white paper. Julian, his full legal name, along with his phone number and his emergency contact, which was listed as my ex-wife, Olivia. A slow, cold sensation washed over me, starting from the back of my neck and traveling all the way down my spine. It was not shock. It was an overwhelming, almost terrifying sense of clarity. Julian had wanted to show off. He had searched for the most expensive, most exclusive apartment in the city to prove his dominance. He had gone online, found the listing for my building, and applied. He had handed over his credit checks, his bank statements, and his signature to my property management company. Because the building was owned by Apex Holdings, he had absolutely no idea who the real landlord was. I sat there in the quiet office, listening to the rain hit the glass windows. A smile, slow and dangerous, crept onto my face. The man who had destroyed my marriage, who had humiliated me and driven me out of my own home, was now living in my house. He was paying off my mortgage. He was legally bound by my rules. Christopher looked up, noticing my silence. "Is there a problem with the new tenant, Mason?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. I closed the folder, keeping my hand resting flat on top of it. "No, Christopher," I said, my voice steady but carrying a heavy, metallic edge. "There is no problem at all. In fact, this is the best investment return I have ever seen." I walked out of Christopher's office feeling like a different man. I was no longer the victim of Julian's psychological games. I was the architect of his reality. As soon as I got back to my car, I locked the doors and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts and hit the call button for Wyatt. Wyatt was the senior property manager at the firm that handled my buildings. He was a ruthless professional, a man who knew landlord-tenant law better than most attorneys. Wyatt answered on the second ring. "Good morning, Mason. What can I do for you?" "Wyatt, I need you to pull the file for Unit 407 in the downtown high-rise," I said, staring straight ahead through the rain-streaked windshield. I heard the sound of keys clacking on a keyboard. "Got it right here. The new tenant moved in about 2 months ago. Everything looks standard. Rent is paid on time. Are you looking to sell?" "No," I replied. "I want to schedule a comprehensive property inspection for that specific unit." Wyatt paused. "An inspection? Usually, we wait until the 6-month mark unless there are complaints from the neighbors. Have you heard something?" I gripped the steering wheel. "I need to review the asset personally. Prepare the standard 10-day notice of entry. Ensure it is sent via certified mail and emailed directly to the tenant. I want everything done exactly by the book. No deviations. No procedural errors." "Understood," Wyatt said, his tone shifting into full business mode. "I will draft the notice immediately. Will I be accompanying you on the inspection?" "No," I said smoothly. "I will be handling this one entirely on my own. Just make sure the paperwork is bulletproof." I hung up the phone. I leaned back against the leather seat, listening to the rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers. Julian thought he was untouchable. He thought he had outsmarted me and won the ultimate victory. But he had walked willingly into a cage, and I was holding the key. I did not rush it. I let the days pass, going to work, hitting the gym, living my life with a quiet, intense focus. I knew the exact day the certified letter arrived in Julian's mailbox. I knew the exact moment the email hit his inbox. The notice was signed by Apex Holdings Management. To Julian, it was just a faceless corporate entity doing routine paperwork. He probably threw the letter on his kitchen counter and didn't give it a second thought. He was too busy planning his next grand performance. But I was preparing too. I reviewed the standard lease agreement he had signed. I memorized the clauses regarding unauthorized modifications, noise violations, and property damage. I knew that a man like Julian, who believed rules did not apply to him, would undoubtedly violate the lease. I just needed to walk in and document it. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the timer was counting down. While the 10-day clock ticked down, Julian provided me with all the ammunition I would ever need. He decided that his luxury penthouse was the perfect venue to host the official engagement party for Olivia and Carter. I found out through social media, of course. Julian couldn't help himself. He went live on his profile a week before the party, holding his phone up to show off his preparations. Getting the penthouse ready for the biggest party of the year, he yelled into the camera, music blasting in the background. "My little sister is marrying my best friend. We have to do it right." He flipped the camera around. My jaw tightened as I watched what he was doing to my property. To make the apartment fit his specific aesthetic for the party, he was actively destroying it. I watched in real time as he used a heavy drill to sink massive screws directly into the custom Italian tiling in the bathroom to hang a decorative mirror. Then he moved to the kitchen. He had hired someone to unscrew the expensive, custom cabinet hardware I had carefully selected, replacing it with cheap, flashy brass handles that didn't fit the pre-drilled holes. But the worst part was the living room. The lease explicitly forbade any painting or structural changes without written permission. Julian was standing in the center of the room with a paint roller, casually slapping a coat of dark, trendy charcoal paint over the pristine white walls. "Gotta set the mood, right?" He laughed, splashing paint onto the expensive hardwood floor. I took screenshots of every single frame. I screen-recorded the entire video. He was not just violating the lease. He was actively documenting his own vandalism. He was so arrogant, so secure in his fake kingdom, that he didn't even consider the consequences of destroying property he did not own. The night of the party, the photos flooded the internet. There must have been 80 people crammed into an apartment zoned for a maximum occupancy of 20. They were spilling drinks on the carpets. They were dragging heavy furniture across the unprotected hardwood floors. I saw photos of Carter and Olivia kissing in front of the freshly painted charcoal wall. They were celebrating the destruction of my marriage while simultaneously destroying my physical property. The poetic justice of it all was almost too perfect. I sat in my home office, compiling the photos into a digital folder, tagging each one with the corresponding lease violation code. Unauthorized modifications, destruction of property, exceeding maximum occupancy, creating a nuisance. Any one of these violations was grounds for immediate eviction. Combined, they were a legal death sentence for his tenancy. Julian was throwing a party on the deck of the Titanic, and I was the iceberg waiting in the dark. The morning of the inspection arrived. It was a crisp, clear Tuesday. I woke up at 5 in the morning, went for a 5-mile run, and came back to take a cold shower. My mind was razor sharp. There was no anger left in me. Anger makes you sloppy. Anger makes you emotional. I was operating purely on logic and consequence. I dressed in my best suit. I polished my shoes until they looked like glass. I wanted to look exactly like what I was. A man of power, a man of wealth, and a man who owned the ground Julian walked on. I sat at my kitchen island with a black cup of coffee, reviewing the thick leather folder I had prepared. Inside were the original purchase documents for the building, the LLC registration proving I was the sole owner of Apex Holdings, Julian's signed lease agreement, the certified mail receipts for the inspection notice, and high-resolution printouts of every single piece of damage he had posted online. I was not just going to confront him. I was going to legally dismantle him. At 1 o'clock, I got into my car and drove downtown. The traffic was light. I pulled into the private underground parking garage of the high-rise. I parked in the designated owner's spot, a spot Julian walked past every single day. I took the private elevator directly up to the 4th floor. The doors slid open with a soft ping. I stepped out into the quiet, carpeted hallway. I walked toward Unit 407, feeling the weight of the leather folder in my hand. Everything had led to this moment. The years of subtle insults, the isolation at family holidays, the manipulation of my wife, the agonizing divorce. All of it brought me right to this heavy mahogany door. I stopped. I took one final, deep breath, centering myself. Then, I raised my hand and knocked firmly 3 times. I heard the music inside. I heard the footsteps approaching. And as the deadbolt clicked and the door began to swing open, I knew that Julian's fake world was about to come crashing down. The door opened, revealing Julian in his silk robe, wine glass in hand. He looked confused, then amused, asking what I was doing there. And I looked him dead in the eye and told him I was there for the property inspection. The trap had officially snapped shut. Julian stared at me, the wine glass trembling slightly in his hand. The smug smile had vanished, replaced by a look of profound confusion. He let out a short, nervous laugh. "Owner?" He scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual arrogant punch. "What kind of sick joke is this? Mason, you don't own this building. Guys living on a mid-level corporate salary don't own downtown high-rises. You are just a bitter ex-husband trying to pull some kind of stunt." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply opened my leather folder and pulled out the physical copy of the 10-day inspection notice, complete with the certified mail tracking number and his signature of receipt from the front desk. I held it up. "Apex Holdings Management sent this to you 10 days ago," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet hallway. "I am the sole managing member of Apex Holdings. Now step aside. I have an inspection to conduct." I did not wait for his permission. I stepped forward, forcing him to stumble backward into the entryway to avoid bumping into me. I walked past him, the scent of stale beer, expensive cologne, and fresh paint hitting my nose immediately. The aftermath of his engagement party was everywhere. I pulled out my tablet and opened the camera application. I started in the entryway. I snapped a photo of the deep gouge in the hardwood floor where someone had dragged a heavy table. Click. I moved into the kitchen. The custom brushed nickel cabinet hardware I had imported from Italy was gone, replaced by cheap, oversized brass handles. Several of the cabinet doors were scratched from the sloppy installation. Click, click. "Hey, wait a minute," Julian shouted, finally finding his voice. He hurried after me, the silk robe flapping around his legs. "You can't just take pictures of my things. I am documenting lease violations, Julian," I said without looking at him. Clause 4, Section B. No unauthorized modifications to the fixtures or structure. I walked into the massive living room and stopped. There it was. The pristine, gallery white wall that spanned the entire length of the room was now a dark, streaky charcoal gray. The paint job was amateurish, with splatters drying on the baseboards. Click. Julian was sweating now. I could see the panic rising in his chest as his brain finally caught up to the reality of the situation. He was doing the math, realizing exactly who he had signed his lease with. "Mason, listen," he started, holding his hands up defensively. "The paint is just a temporary thing for the party. Olivia wanted a dark background for the photos. I was going to paint it back. You know how she gets." I ignored him, moving down the hallway to the master bathroom. I pushed the door open. 2 massive holes had been drilled directly into the custom marble tiling to hold a decorative floating shelf. Click. "That is structural damage to premium materials," I said aloud, typing a note into my tablet. "That violates Clause 7. I walked back into the living room. Julian was standing in the center of his ruined charcoal wall, looking like a little boy who had just been caught breaking a window. All the bravado, all the superiority he had projected for the last 2 years was entirely gone. He was standing in my property, and he suddenly realized he had handed me the absolute power to destroy his carefully curated life. Julian's eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for an escape route that did not exist. He set his wine glass down on a side table with a loud clink. His hands were visibly shaking. He took a step toward me, his face twisting into an expression of desperate vulnerability. It was the same look he had used on Olivia 1,000 times to get his way. Mason, come on, he said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to sound intimate and pleading. You are taking this too far. I know the divorce was hard on you. I know you are hurting. But you don't have to do this. We are family. I stopped typing on my tablet. I slowly looked up at him. The sheer audacity of the man was almost impressive. We are not family, Julian, I said, my voice as cold as ice. You made absolutely sure of that. You spent 2 years treating me like an outsider in my own home. You engineered a divorce so your best friend could sleep in my bed. You erased me from your family. So do not stand there and use that word with me. He swallowed hard, taking another step back. Okay, I get it. You are angry. But this is my home, Mason. You can't just kick me out over some paint and a few scratches. Carter and Olivia are over here all the time. Where are we supposed to go? I looked at him, feeling a deep, resonating sense of satisfaction. It was not a fiery, vengeful feeling. It was the calm, absolute peace of knowing the scales had finally balanced. I am not kicking you out today, Julian, I explained smoothly. I am submitting this inspection report to Apex Holdings Management. They will issue you a formal notice of lease violation. You will have 30 days to hire licensed, bonded contractors, approved by my management company, to restore this unit to its exact original condition. If you fail to do so, or if you cause any further nuisance, the eviction process will begin immediately. He looked at the charcoal wall, then back at me. His eyes welled up with tears. Real tears this time. He was realizing how much this was going to cost him. Restoring that marble tile and paying professional painters would wipe out whatever credit he had left. Mason, please, he begged, his voice cracking. I can't afford that right now. The party cost a fortune. Just give me a break. Let me fix it myself. I promise I will make it right. Just give me a chance. I slipped the tablet back into my leather folder and zipped it shut. I looked at his crying face, feeling absolutely nothing. Our relationship is landlord and tenant, I said. All future communication will go through Wyatt at the management office. If you try to contact me directly, I will consider it tenant harassment and file the appropriate legal actions. Have a good afternoon, Julian. I turned my back on him and walked out the door. I did not look back as the heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind me. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the parking garage, and allowed myself a single, brief smile. I was barely halfway home when my phone started ringing. The caller ID flashed across my dashboard screen. It was Olivia. Julian had not even waited 10 minutes to go crying to his sister. I let it ring 4 times before I tapped the button on my steering wheel to answer. Hello, Olivia, I said calmly. Her voice came through the speakers, shrill and shaking with rage. Are you insane? She screamed. What is wrong with you, Mason? Julian just called me having a full-blown panic attack. He said you barged into his apartment, threatened to make him homeless, and started taking pictures of his things. How dare you harass my brother? I listened to her yell, keeping my eyes on the road. It was incredible how quickly she jumped to his defense, completely disregarding reality. Are you finished? I asked when she finally paused for a breath. No, I am not finished, she yelled. You are a bitter, vindictive man. Just because you couldn't handle our divorce doesn't give you the right to stalk my family. Julian is terrified of you. I am going to call the police. Olivia, I interrupted, my voice slicing through her hysterics like a knife. Check your email. What? She snapped. Stop trying to change the subject. I said, check your email, I repeated. Right now. While I am on the phone. I heard her breathing heavily on the other end. I heard the faint click of a computer mouse. I had forwarded her the same documents I showed Julian. The deed to the building, the LLC registration, and the formal management contract. I listened to the silence stretch out over the phone line. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. The only sound was the hum of my car tires on the highway. I could picture her sitting in the living room of the house I had let her keep, staring at her laptop screen as the reality of my financial independence washed over her. She had always believed Julian's narrative that I was just a stressed-out corporate worker dependent on my next paycheck. She never bothered to ask about my investments, She never knew that while she was busy playing house with Carter, I was building an empire. Mason, she finally whispered. Her voice was completely drained of anger, sounded small, hollow, and incredibly confused. You own the building? I own the building, I confirmed. Julian signed a legally binding contract. He violated several clauses of that contract by destroying premium property. I conducted a routine inspection. There was no harassment. There was only business. But why didn't you ever tell me? She asked, her voice cracking. Because you never asked, Olivia, I said softly. And because you made it very clear that your brother's business was more important than your husband's. Tell Julian he will receive the formal violation notice from the management company tomorrow morning. I pressed the button on the steering wheel, ending the call. The silence in the car was beautiful. The next morning, I walked into the sleek, modern office of my lawyer, David. David was a shark in a tailored suit, the kind of attorney who spoke softly but carried a massive legal hammer. I sat across from his desk and handed him a flash drive containing the inspection photos and the audio recordings of the voicemails Julian's mother had left me overnight. As expected, the mother had lost her mind. She had left me 6 voicemails between midnight and 3 in the morning, screaming threats, calling me every name in the book, and demanding I apologize to her golden boy. David listened to the voicemails, his expression neutral. He clicked through the photos of the damaged apartment. They are reacting exactly like cornered animals, David said, leaning back in his leather chair. The mother is threatening to sue you for emotional distress. It is laughable, but we need to shut it down before they try to escalate this into a public nuisance. Draft the letters, I said. David nodded. He spent the next hour drafting formal cease and desist orders. One for Julian, one for Olivia, and one for the mother. The letters were masterpieces of legal intimidation. They outlined exactly how their continued unwanted contact constituted harassment. They clearly stated that I was operating within my legal rights as a property owner, and that any further contact outside of the property management company would result in immediate civil litigation and requests for restraining orders. We sent them out by certified courier that very afternoon. When those letters landed on their doorsteps, the circus finally stopped. The phone calls ceased. The text messages ended. The social media posts about me disappeared. I had built a massive, impenetrable legal wall around myself. Julian realized that he could not cry his way out of a legal contract, and his mother realized that her screaming had absolutely no power over a man with a better lawyer. They were finally forced to deal with the consequences of their own actions. Trapped in an apartment they were now legally obligated to fix at their own expense. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. 2 weeks after the cease and desist letters were delivered, I received an unexpected text message from an unknown number. It read, "Mason, it is Matthew, Olivia's uncle. We need to talk. I know what Julian did. Meet me at the diner on 4th Street at noon." I hesitated. Uncle Matthew was the quiet one in their family. He was the brother of Olivia's mother, a retired high school history teacher who mostly kept to himself at family gatherings. He had always been polite to me, but we had never shared more than passing pleasantries. Curiosity won out over my desire to remain entirely disconnected. I arrived at the diner at noon. Matthew was already sitting in a corner booth, nursing a black coffee. He looked older than I remembered, his face lined with exhaustion. I slid into the booth across from him. "Thank you for coming, Mason," he said quietly, wrapping his hands around the warm coffee mug. "I heard what happened with the apartment. The whole family is in an uproar. My sister is acting like you committed a war crime." I smiled faintly. "I just enforced a lease, Matthew." He nodded slowly. "I know, and I am glad somebody finally stood up to that boy. But I asked you here because there is something you need to know. Something I should have told you years ago. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick stack of printed photographs. He slid them across the table toward me. I looked down at them. They were old pictures, some faded, some printed from digital cameras. I flipped through the first few. They were photos of Olivia from her college years. In one photo, she was standing next to a tall guy with dark hair. But Julian was standing right between them, his arm draped heavily over Olivia's shoulders, physically pushing the boyfriend to the edge of the frame. I flipped to the next photo. A different guy. A few years later. Same exact pose. Julian standing in the middle, looking smug, while the boyfriend looked uncomfortable on the periphery. Julian has a sickness, Matthew said, his voice grave. Ever since my father's funeral, when Julian realized he could use grief to manipulate his mother, he has been controlling that family. But his obsession with Olivia is the worst part. You were not the first, Mason. I looked up at him, my brow furrowed. What do you mean? Matthew pointed to the photos. That is Greg. And that is Michael. And there was another one named Thomas. 3 serious, long-term boyfriends before you. And Julian destroyed every single one of those relationships using the exact same playbook he used on you. I felt a cold chill run down my arms. I stared at the faces of the men in the photos. They looked just as isolated and exhausted as I had felt. He would find a weakness, Matthew explained. He would exploit it. He would make them look bad in front of the mother. He would slowly isolate Olivia, telling her that these men were trying to control her, taking her away from her family. He would manufacture drama, lie about things they said, and eventually the pressure would be too much. The guys would leave or Olivia would break down and end it. Why? I asked, genuinely horrified by the pattern. Why would he do that to his own sister? Because if Olivia has a strong, independent husband, Julian loses control over her, Matthew said simply. He needs her to be dependent on him so he can feel powerful. You were the biggest threat he ever faced, Mason. You were successful. You didn't need their money. You didn't play their games. He had to destroy your marriage or he would lose his grip on his kingdom. I sat back against the vinyl booth. The revelation shifted everything in my mind. For 2 years, I had agonized over what I did wrong. I had wondered if I was a bad husband, if I was truly the controlling monster they claimed I was. But looking at those photos, I realized I was just the latest casualty in a psychological war that had been going on for a decade. I am sorry I didn't speak up, Matthew said, looking down at the table. I watched him do it to you, and I stayed quiet to keep the peace with my sister. I am ashamed of that. You don't need to apologize to me, Matthew, I said softly. I got out. I survived it. The person you should be worried about now is Carter. Matthew sighed heavily. Carter is already figuring it out. And it is not pretty. Matthew was right. A month after my meeting with him, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was Carter. Mason, please don't block me. I need to talk to you. I am drowning, man. Please. I stared at the message. The man who had sat in my kitchen, who had slept in my bed, who had actively participated in the destruction of my marriage, was begging me for help. I should have ignored it, but the sheer irony was too heavy to resist. I told him to meet me at a park on the edge of town, neutral ground far away from Julian's watchful eyes. Carter was sitting on a park bench when I arrived. He looked terrible. He had lost weight. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hands were trembling as he held a lit cigarette. He looked up when I approached, his face etched with pure misery. I stood a few feet away, my hands in my pockets. You look awful, Carter, I said plainly. He let out a hollow, bitter laugh. I feel awful. He took a drag of his cigarette and looked out at the empty playground. He started talking, the words spilling out of him like water from a broken dam. He confessed everything. He told me how Julian had swooped in when he was at his lowest, right after he lost his custody battle for his kids. Julian had offered him money, friendship, and a place in the family. He told me what to wear. Mason, Carter whispered, staring at the ground. He told me what jokes to tell Olivia. He bought the Christmas sweaters. He literally orchestrated every single interaction I had with your wife. and I went along with it because I was so desperate for someone to care about me. And now? I asked, feeling no sympathy, only a cold, clinical curiosity. Now I am trapped, Carter said, his voice breaking. We are supposed to get married in 3 months. But Julian dictates everything. He chose the venue. He chose the catering. He is even trying to tell me what neighborhood we have to live in. If I disagree with him, he threatens to cut me off, tells me Olivia will leave me just like my first wife did. He is using my custody case against me, saying he won't testify as a character witness for me if I don't fall in line. Carter looked up at me, his eyes wide with genuine fear. He is a monster, Mason. You were right. You were right about all of it. I thought I was stealing your perfect life, but I just stepped into a cage. I looked at the broken man on the bench. He had sold his soul for the illusion of a family, and now the devil was collecting his due. Cancel the wedding, Carter, I said calmly. Pack your bags and leave. If you marry her, you will never have a free thought for the rest of your life. I can't, he sobbed, putting his head in his hands. He will destroy me. He already has, I replied. I turned and walked away, leaving Carter crying on the park bench. 2 weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that Carter had packed his car in the middle of the night and driven across the country, completely abandoning Olivia and blocking Julian's number. The golden wedding was off. The puppet had cut his own strings. The collapse of Olivia and Carter's relationship sent shockwaves through their family, but it was nothing compared to the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. Out of nowhere, I received a phone call from Robert. Robert was Olivia and Julian's biological father. He had divorced their mother 20 years ago and had been entirely estranged from the family ever since. Olivia had always told me he was a deadbeat who abandoned them. Robert asked to meet me for a drink. I agreed. We met at a quiet pub. Robert was a distinguished-looking man, calm and deliberate in his movements. He ordered a scotch and looked me in the eye. I heard you finally broke the curse, Mason, Robert said, raising his glass slightly. I studied him. Why did you leave them? I asked directly. Robert sighed. Because of her. My ex-wife. The mother. She is a black hole of need and manipulation. When Julian was a boy, she realized she could control him by making him responsible for her emotional state. She drained their college fund to buy a luxury car to impress her friends. She used the promise of a massive inheritance from her parents to keep everyone in line, threatening to disinherit anyone who disagreed with her. She trained Julian to be a narcissist. She taught him that love is conditional on obedience. I tried to take the kids with me when I left, but she poisoned them against me. She told them I didn't want them. He took a slow sip of his scotch. I watched from afar as Julian ruined Olivia's life over and over again. I'm glad you got out, Mason. You are a good man. You deserve a real family. Hearing Robert's side of the story was the final closure I needed. The ghost of my failed marriage completely evaporated. It was never my fault. It was a generational cycle of abuse that I had thankfully escaped. With my mind entirely clear, my life began to accelerate in ways I had never imagined. At work, my performance skyrocketed. Without the crushing weight of Julian's psychological warfare dragging me down, I was clear-headed and focused. I received another major promotion, becoming the vice president of regional operations. My salary doubled. My real estate portfolio, managed brilliantly by Wyatt, continued to generate massive passive income. I bought a third commercial building, solidifying my financial independence. But the most important change was personal. 6 months after the confrontation in the penthouse, I attended a charity gala hosted by my company. That is where I met Chloe. Chloe was a brilliant architect, fiercely independent, with a laugh that could light up a room. But more importantly, she came from a family that actually loved and respected each other. When I met her father for the first time, he shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye, and asked about my career. There were no hidden agendas. There were no manipulative games. If we had a disagreement, we talked about it like adults. For the first time in my life, I experienced what a healthy relationship looked like. I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't being isolated. I was being supported. Chloe knew everything about my past, about the divorce, about Julian and the apartment. She didn't judge me. She respected the way I had handled it. I was finally building a foundation on solid rock, not the shifting sands of a toxic family. A year passed. Julian's lease eventually came up for renewal. Wyatt called me to report that Julian had submitted a formal notice to vacate. He could no longer afford the rent, especially after paying out of pocket to completely restore the apartment's marble tile, repaint the walls, and replace the custom hardware to avoid eviction. He moved out quietly on a Tuesday afternoon, dragging his boxes into a rented moving truck. He didn't have his shiny Porsche anymore. I heard it had been repossessed months ago. I didn't go to watch him leave. I didn't care. He was a ghost, a lesson I had learned and moved past. On a warm evening in late spring, exactly 2 years after my divorce was finalized, I took Chloe out for dinner. I told her I wanted to show her the view from the rooftop of my downtown building. We took the private elevator all the way to the top. The city spread out below us, a glittering ocean of lights pulsing with life. The wind was warm, carrying the faint sound of traffic from the streets below. We stood by the glass railing, looking out over the skyline. I had bought this building as a silent investment, a piece of financial armor. It had unexpectedly become the stage for my greatest trial, the place where the truth was finally exposed. And now I wanted it to be the place where my real life began. I turned to Chloe, the city lights reflected in her eyes. I took her hands in mine, feeling the steady, calming warmth of her skin. I dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from my jacket pocket. Chloe gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. I looked up at the woman who had shown me what true partnership meant. I didn't need a grand speech. I just needed her. I asked her to marry me. She said yes, laughing and crying at the same time, pulling me up into a tight embrace. We stood on top of the world, surrounded by everything I had built, completely untouchable. My phone buzzed in my pocket the next morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island with Chloe, drinking coffee. I glanced at the screen. It was Olivia. I hadn't spoken to her in a year. I answered the call, putting it on speaker so Chloe could hear. "Hello?" I said calmly. "Mason," Olivia said. Her voice sounded older, tired. I saw the news online. About your engagement. I just called to say congratulations." "Thank you, Olivia," I replied politely. There was a long pause. "Julian had to move back in with our mother," she said quietly, unprompted. "He lost his job. Carter is gone. It's just me and my mom now. I started going to therapy, Mason. My therapist thinks I have a lot of apologizing to do. I am so sorry for what we did to you, for what I let him do." I looked across the kitchen island at Chloe. She smiled at me, a warm, reassuring smile. I looked back at the phone. I didn't feel angry at Olivia anymore. I just felt a profound sense of distance, like she was a character in a movie I had watched a long time ago. "I accept your apology, Olivia," I said, my voice gentle but perfectly firm. "I wish you the best of luck with your therapy. Take care of yourself." I tapped the button and hung up the phone. I didn't block her number. I didn't need to. She had absolutely no power over me anymore. The past was finally completely closed. I looked around my beautiful home, at my incredible fiancé, and thought about the journey it took to get here. Sometimes the universe forces you to walk through fire, not to burn you, but to burn away everything that is holding you back. Julian tried to bury me, not realizing I was a seed. I grew into a tree that cast a shadow over his entire life. The best revenge isn't screaming, fighting, or playing their games. The best revenge is massive, undeniable success, and a life lived beautifully without them. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long journey, but sharing it means a lot to me. I hope this resonated with you in some way, maybe reminded you of your own strength when dealing with difficult people. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, dealing with a toxic family member or someone who tried to tear you down? Tell me about it in the comments below. And for those of you who are still here, listening to my voice right at this very second, I have a special request. You are the real ones. You are the ones who understand the value of patience and the payoff of a good story. I call you guys the 1% Club. If you are part of that club, I want you to comment the letter W below. W stands for winner, because if you made it through this whole story, you understand what it takes to win in the end. It lets me know exactly who the dedicated listeners are. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, and don't forget to follow the channel so we can share more incredible journeys together. Stay strong, keep building your empire, and I'll see you in the next one.